Okay, so in terms of making a decision, you want to think about your own risk aversion versus risk acceptance, okay? You want to think about, what's the likelihood of success, right? So if I get this policy enacted, how likely is it to actually lead to the outcome that I want? Right? Now, of course, again, you don't know that for sure, but there's a difference between implementing a policy in reaction to this crisis that's been tried many times before and has a proven track record, or seems to have worked before, versus trying something brand new that nobody's ever tried before. Right? You're going to have more confidence doing something that already seems to have worked in a similar circumstance in the past. You got to think about the costs of action versus the costs of inaction. Okay? Whether that's in terms of, again, the practical or the political. All right? Sometimes, for example, in politics, it's important just to act, even if that action doesn't actually produce any good results, right? You're saying to the public, I did something, I'm dealing with it, right? There are even times where just that action really, regardless of what the policy is, makes things better because people are more likely to think things are going to be better. And so, for example, if you are starting into a recession and the president convinces the public that he or she has a policy that's going to help and bring us out of recession, people are going to be less likely to say, I can't spend any money because I might get laid off, right? And if they go out and continue to spend as normal, it might help bring the economy up, right? Again, have nothing to do with whatever that plan is the president actually announced. It's just the confidence that things are going to be okay leads people to act in a way that actually help the economy to be okay, right? But also it's in practical terms, right? Again, as we've talked about before, if you wait around to learn more, bad things may continue to happen to people, and you've got to take some of that responsibility then. Okay, you got to think about the time horizon, right? How long is it going to take for any policy I announce to actually go into effect? How long is it going to take for us to see any benefit potentially from that policy? I mean, sometimes you're in a situation where you can say, well, I firmly believe that this policy is going to improve things. Of course, by the time things start to improve, I'll be out of office already. Either because my second term is up or because, people will not have seen the benefits yet and they're going to vote me out of office. Right? And that certainly influences, right? I mean, the clearest case of where I like to use where time horizon makes a big difference is dealing with the issues around Social Security and Medicare. Right? So we've known, I was in high school, so that was a long time ago. I was in high school doing debate, and we were talking about the fact that Social Security was going to run out of money. Right? So for a number of decades, I'm not going to tell you, people have been actively talking about, well, what do we do with the fact that Social Security is going to run out of money? The system is not going to be solvent in the long term, right? And we've made some cosmetic changes. We've made some minor changes along the way, but nothing major to actually fix the problem, right? It kind of extended that deadline of when it's going to get, start to really have problems a little bit, but we haven't actually fixed the problem, right? Now, there may be a number of reasons for it, but one of them is that the costs of taking those actions that would actually fix the problem would show up pretty soon, pretty quickly, right? So if you do things like say, all right, we're going to slow the growth of benefits. We're going to increase taxes to pay more or put more money into that Social Security trust fund, right? We're going to stop, borrowing from the Social Security Trust Fund, which Congress was doing as long as there was still money in the Social Security Trust Fund, right? Those have immediate costs, right? People who are expecting that their Social Security check is going to go up don't see as great of increases as they thought, and that means they have less money than they were expecting, and maybe life is harder on them or just, not as good as they thought it was going to be. They're going to be mad, right? We raise taxes, well, your paycheck goes down. People are going to notice that. They're not going to be happy about that, right? Now, the people who are going to benefit from it aren't retiring for decades yet at that point, right? If we go back to when I was in high school, we say, well, you might have been 20 years old and you would be one of the people who would really benefit from the fact that we fixed this problem that was going to, cause you problems when you got to retirement age. But it's going to take decades before you get to that point. And so you're paying those costs up front. The benefits might be much greater in the long run, but you're not going to see those benefits. So if you are a member of Congress or you're a president and you push for a policy like that, the voters are going to see the costs and probably vote based on their feelings about those costs before they ever see the benefits and vote based on what those benefits are. In fact, you might be dead before people really start to recognize the benefits of it, right? So that's going to play a big role. All right, we're going to think about the number of alternatives, right? How many choices do we actually have, right? And the more that you can narrow those down, the easier it's going to be to decide. So we're not going to treat all alternatives equally, right? I mean, maybe you have a really hyperactive, set of advisors who bring you 20 different options how we can deal with this, right? You've got to come up with criteria. And how can we just eliminate some of these right at the start? What can we use to filter out some that I know ultimately I'm not going to pick, would not be the best option? Bring it down to a manageable number of options that we can actually look at in depth and think about to make that decision. We got to think about setting priorities in terms of what the expected outcomes might be. So what I mean by that, all policies have multiple effects. There's no policy that only creates one effect, right? I have this problem, I implement this policy. The only thing it does is solve that problem and nothing else, right? The world doesn't work that way. I might solve that problem and create 12 other problems in the process, right? Or I might solve that problem and create 12 other unexpected benefits in the process, right? There's most likely it's going to do some other things that are good, it's going to do some other things that are bad, no matter what that policy is, right? So as we're thinking about all the possible outcomes, we need to prioritize, well, which of these is most important? Because I'm not just going to add it up and say, well, I think it's going to do 3 bad things and 2 good things, we won't do it. Well, what if those 2 good things are really good things? Right? What if it's 1 good thing, but it's a really good thing? It's going to really benefit a lot of people, and there's 3 negative outcomes, but they're relatively minor, I think, right? But that prioritization is not necessarily easy because we're not talking about apples to apples comparisons, right? It's not just all about money, for example, right? It could have social effects, it could have cultural effects, it could have all sorts of effects that we can't just put numbers on to quantify to say, okay, well, average income is going to go up by this, but we're going to take away this many dollars because of this social effect that's going to come as a result, right? We can't do that. We have to think about how do we rank order these apples and oranges, right? All right, and finally, we're going to really have to kind of weight the sources or the different pieces of information, especially if information is giving me different stories, right? Some information is pushing me in favor of this policy, some information is pushing me against this policy. Now I'm going to have to really go in and evaluate those pieces of information. Again, I don't want to just have a column where I add up, I have 5 pieces of information that are in favor and 5 pieces that are against, right? I'm going to really have to weight them based on what I know about their sources, based on my own ideology, based on my own experience, based on my contextual knowledge. I'm going to put all of these into a context to say, ultimately, I think this is the most important piece of information. This might be the second most, third most, right? And that might help in a case where I've got conflicting pictures from that information, right? If I end up trusting one set of pieces of information more, that might lead me more in a direction than the other. Okay. Now, none of this is to guarantee that you get the right decision, okay? But what it does do is kind of help you at least get to the position where you can make a decision, even understanding that you have that uncertainty, right? We want to know that uncertainty is there, but we don't want to be paralyzed by it. And so getting an idea of how much there is, doing things we can to reduce it, those are useful, but then we also have to actually make a decision, and kind of understanding ourselves, understanding the circumstances, understanding some basic strategies can help us to get to that point where even though we know, yeah, we don't have 100% certain response here, we can try something and not just default to nothing. All right, questions about that? All right, it's only a few minutes early, but we'll stop there. Next time, we're going to pick up with thinking about intelligence gathering. So again, I'll post some the reading on Blackboard for next week. Make sure you look at that. Make sure you do your discussion this week, and we will go from there.